Get started? Okay. So yeah, that is indeed a lot of energy. My name is John Fox. Nice to meet you. I'm actually a Waco guy myself. My kids go to China Spring area, but I am faculty at MCC. So I'm a faculty in the Music Industry Careers Program at MCC. Really enjoyed that. Like I said, a lot of energy. I think what I'd like to talk about most, unless you have something specific.
Not necessarily.
I would like to talk about overall dynamics, right? You guys are a freight train right now, and that's cool. There is nothing wrong with that, and that is absolutely something you want to keep in your back pocket and have available to you, right? But having said that, be careful not to let that override everything else you do. That freight train, that top end of the dynamic range, I think is most effective when it contrasts with a lower end of the dynamic range, right? Contrast is where it's at, right? You get the real stretch from top to bottom. I think that's the most effective way to make use of the power that you guys have. You're blowing a lot of air right now. It's a powerful band. The consensus was upstairs amongst the judges all the way around that, what's your name? Demetrius, you have a ton of chops, you're a great drummer, you're too loud. Right? Be careful. Be careful with that. Can we just kind of start, and by the way, just for the record, I mentioned this on my recording. Harlem Nocturne, near and dear to my heart, one of my favorite tunes. I love that tune. Nice job. Have you ever heard of Phil Woods? No, you don't know who Phil Woods is? Ever heard of Phil Woods? Ever heard of Phil Woods? What we got? We got 3 altos and a tenor. You're exempt from this. Y'all need to check out Phil Woods. Phil Woods is great. One of the classic jazz alto guys. But he has a really great recording of this tune, Harlem Nocturne. I think it's on. Again, I mentioned some of the recording. I think it's on an album called Mile High Jazz. But definitely check that out. I'm curious if you listen to any versions of the tune beyond reading what you had in the card. By who?
Okay. But I know you listen because we use the. I showed them the sample recording she asked for recording. So
from the chart.
Like,
Okay. Yeah. So I'd be curious to know who played on that.
Not sure.
But there's going to be a ton. This is a classic alto feature tune, right? And so there's going to be a ton of recordings of this of that particular tune throughout the years. Right? It's a classic alto feature. Definitely check out some versions of this tune and hear how players manipulate the melody. Right? It's more, and this is something we do across the board as jazz players. Not only if it's the featured melody, but even in the figures we play, we want to manipulate these lines and these ideas in a way that brings something to the table that's not necessarily on the page, right? It's more than the notes and rhythms, right? The jazz language is more than the notes and rhythms that we can fit onto the page. If you try to notate all the nuance that we want to bring to a melody and to a figure, again, whether it's the featured melody or a background figure or an ensemble shout kind of chorus thing, we bring so much to that in terms of pitch bends and slurs and dynamic range and pushing through notes and all that kind of thing. That it's impossible to notate all that, but we kind of have to have it in our back pocket already. And of course, that comes from listening. We mostly listen. Again, I'm going to pick on you a little bit just because you're standing up front, singing Harlem Nocturne, right? So we want to make sure we get that as an extension of our voice and really hear those nuances and play a melody in the same way that you would sing it, if you can. All right. So that said, I would actually just kind of like to start with your first tune.
Sure.
Again, this is a really, really powerful chart, right? But I think there's room to make it more effective by focusing on the low end, focusing on the low end of the dynamic range. And yeah, if we could just go ahead and start it from the top direct ensemble, one ensemble with the rock band.
Oh, all right.
I'd probably be interested in that as well. Just a guess, so you're not just a jazz guy.
Oh, yeah. These blues aren't deep.
There you go. Yeah. I would have guessed from the vibrato. This is a hip chart, by the way. Who arranged this? Yeah. Go figure.
Here we go. Stop. 1, 2, 1, 2, break.
So that's awesome. So I know he's got that mark that's just forte straight through, yeah? I would like to try something here. I'd like to try something just to see what it does and see how you hear it. What is it? 6, 8, 16, right? Yeah, 16 measures. So I would like to start this about 2 dynamic levels lower, right? So a mezzo piano kind of place about. Take that 8 measures, and then starting with measure 9, start to build into that long note in measures 15 and 16, yeah? Does that make sense? Okay. Again, the dynamic range, and that doesn't necessarily mean that's what you would always do with this chart. You might want to just kind of blast in the door, kind of blast in the door anyway. But I just want to use this as an example of what I'm talking about. I think you'll hear something different. I know you'll hear something different if you execute this. Let's see what happens. Can we do that?
1, 2, 1, 2, break.
Personally, I think that sounds way cooler, and I would like to even take that and kind of double that range, right? Double the wide range. Start even lower, and then let your forte become double forte and is kind of as much as you can bring, with one exception. So we have that long note on the downbeat of measure 15, yeah? Everybody see that? Everybody know what sforzando is? What that word means? What is it? I'm sorry?
Suddenly loud.
Suddenly loud, but then bring it back, like a forte piano, right? So bring it back and let it grow through that double whole note, right? So really, the end of measure 14 is what your peak volume should be, and then hit that downbeat, you push through those 2 measures, right? And here's what will happen. Right now, again, it's like a freight train just coming down the tracks, and it's all out all the time. But if we can do these 2 things, if we can get the low end to be effective and still with that intensity, you guys are playing with a ton of energy. And I heard a really, really great analogy earlier today from one of my colleagues upstairs. And he called it the whisper shout. You all know what this means? And if you all have younger siblings? Do you ever have to talk to your younger siblings? I have a 10-year-old. I do this all the time. Right? You got to do that kind of thing where you can't be loud, but you got to be intense. Right? So if you can bring the same intensity to what you're playing, but at a much lower dynamic level, and again, I'd like to kind of double that range right now. So that was pretty effective, right? But get even softer at the beginning. And again, I know I'm going against what's here, but I just want to use it as an example of how effective this kind of thing can be, right? So start with that whisper intensity, right? That whispering shout. Start with that same energy, that same intensity, but at a much lower dynamic level. Cool? Can we do that? And again, into measure 14, that's going to be your peak, and then punch that note, punch that double whole note. Bah! right, bring it back, and then push right through the end of that, of measure 15. Cool? Really, the whisper shout. That's really cool. That's really cool. I think that sounds great. I think that sounds really good.
I think the piano from the trombones would be less. I think you stuck out. Once everyone dropped down, I heard too much more trombone than anyone else.
So again, I think it's the motion. I think it's the range that makes that powerful sound so powerful, right? If all you bring is the freight train, then it's not nearly as effective out in the audience. It's just kind of like a wash. You know what I mean? So that's one thing I wanted to talk about that I noticed.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah,
real quick?
absolutely.
Just on the whisper shout thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, specifically for Demetrius, like, there's a lot of times where I'm asking him to back off, but I don't ever want him to stop driving. So, like,
Yeah.
how can he drive really well without playing as loud, like in the spots where I need him to play softer?
So I'm not a drummer. I don't,
Yeah.
you know, I a little bit about drumming, and I don't know. I'm not sure I can answer your question
Okay.
effectively. I know that a lot of it is just in the ear, right? I think a lot of it is just in the ear and hearing that same intensity without needing to, you know, put all the muscle behind it. Again, you got a ton of chops. I have no doubt at all that you are capable technically of pulling this kind of thing off, right? But I think again, consensus upstairs was that that the band at times is having a hard time matching the power that you're playing with, right? And so that's kind of up to you to adjust that according to who you're playing with. And the analogy that somebody used upstairs was, you know, it's a different deal if you're playing with John Coltrane as opposed to Paul Desmond, right? And I don't know if any of you know those two names. Anybody know either of those names by any chance? Which or both?
They all should be raising their hands.
They all should be at this point.
Because we've listened to Coltrane like maybe 7 or 8 times this year.
Coltrane is obviously one of the big names, right? If there's a Mount Rushmore of jazz, you got Miles, you got Coltrane, you got Charlie Parker, and I'm sure there's a piano player up there somewhere. I'm sure we find one. Maybe not though, because maybe it's Louis Armstrong. So, but Coltrane's, you know, one of those names, right? But known to be very intense, right? A very powerful player, a very intense and powerful player. Whereas Paul Desmond, if you don't know, is he wrote Dave Brubeck's, well, it's his tune, but he wrote the famous Dave Brubeck recording, Take 5. You know that tune?
So yeah, we've done it for psychology.
Oh, have you? Cool. Yeah. So you know, right? Much more laid back, much more kind of pretty saxophone sound. Right? He's an alto player, whereas obviously Coltrane is a tenor player. That's
Heather.
I looked at it real quick and I thought it was an alto. And it's funny because a friend of mine just told me yesterday. I was like, I know this already, of course. But he says, man, you gotta look at the neck. You gotta look at the neck. The curved neck.
Right.
So anyway, you know, an alto player versus a tenor player, but that's not the huge difference. The huge difference is just in the kind of presence they have as players, right? And Paul Desmond is just a much more polite player, right? He's much more melodic and polite player, whereas Coltrane is much more powerful and kind of intense guy. Just the way it is. So anyway.
As a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So, like,
I love questions. If y'all have any questions, please. I would love to spend our whole time answering questions if I can, rather than me just yapping. Just please.
I'm in my second year here. I'm obviously a pretty young director,
Sure.
and yeah, they're all young.
Yeah.
Actually. But as far as like young musicians, like, and I was sitting in that spot and that spot not too long ago, and like, you know, every time we go to these clinics, you hear okay, yeah, you need to get listening. Oh yeah, there's a style here. There's this name that of course I press up. Oh, I don't know the name. Sorry, you know. Like, how would you encourage? Or what advice would you give to young musicians to get them to actually like really want to start listening and really explore all these names and like?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think we all want to be good at this. It's just like. It's like they're saying, it's been great. It's so noisy.
Yeah, it is so noisy, and there's a lot of noise out in that atmosphere, right? So I think the first thing that directly addresses your question, and I think it's a legitimate question. You say, I think everybody wants to be good at this. The question is, are you willing to take the time to be good at this? You know, again, going back to the clinic, you know, Kenny mentioned several times, you know, how important it is to find this mindset and do this thing and do that thing and have that kind of attitude going in. But he also said, if you notice several different times, how much time it takes to get to that point where, for example, the technology of a tune is accessible, right? So the technology of a tune is accessible when you don't have to think so much about what the chord tones are, because those are the notes that we have to emphasize as a soloist, and you know how the chord changes move in rhythm, right?
Mm-hmm.
So part of that, on a bigger kind of musical question, becomes: are you willing to take the time to listen to the players that speak this language, right? So, for example, I'd ask the trumpet players, who are your give me two names. Who are your favorite jazz trumpet players? I'll go down the road. Hold on. Miles Davis and that's the list, right? That's the list of trumpet players that young trumpet players know.
I was
Right?
literally in that spot and answered the exact same question the exact same way,
right?
when I was in high school.
Dizzy Gillespie and Miles.
Excellent answer. Excellent answer. Dizzy? I'm gonna assume Miles, but and Louis Armstrong. Again, three of the greats. Okay. What about Freddie Hubbard?
We listened to him in class.
Yeah. What was the one that has the documentary about?
Wynton Marsalis.
There you go.
Wynton Marsalis, a much more contemporary player, but plays in most of the time in a pretty traditional vein, right? Freddie Hubbard. What about Clifford Brown? You ever heard these names? Great trumpet players. Chet Baker, you know that name?
Yeah.
Chet Baker's fantastic. I have my jazz improv class at FCC transcribe Chet Baker solos all the time because he's so melodic, right? You can just sing along with Chet Baker solos. And so the point here is, and you mentioned it, usually that list is Miles Davis, Roadblock, right? We don't know any of the names. We've got to seek out these names. We've got to seek out the recordings. There's so many. Art Pepper, right? Again, you know, Clifford Brown and Freddie Hubbard, my personal favorites from kind of the bebop era. Again, because of the lyricism that they brought to the table. Plus, another one of my favorite tunes happens to be Joy Spring, the great Freddie Hubbard tune. Flip it around. Sorry. Anyway, seek out these names and spend some time listening to these players, right? You know any jazz trombone players? It's a much smaller list, and we don't have the big icon of Miles Davis, right? Check out J.J. Johnson. Saxophone players. Who we got?
All right, I listen to like a lot of contemporary stuff, like Walter Beasley or Grover Washington.
Okay. A lot of soprano, right? Grover Washington was kind of the cool jazz scene, right? Again, very polite.
But of course, I listen to Eric Clapton. He's like that.
Oh, stop! That's not jazz. That's not jazz. That's pop music. I'm serious. I'm dead serious when I say that. That is Kenny G is pop music played with the instrumentation that is normally associated with the jazz chords. There's very little jazz in it. The saxophone lexicon is huge. There's a ton of names. But again, it's the question is, do you have the time, and are you willing to take the time to learn the language through these folks, right? Again, if you're playing a featured solo on Harlem Nocturne, it blows my mind that you wouldn't know Phil Woods, right? Seek out that recording, right?
It's about time.
Are we really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, just real quickly, the vibrato. I know it comes with the blues tradition, right? You gotta leave it at the door when you're playing with this band. Okay? It's just a fact of nature in this particular instrument with this kind of style. Even when you bring a little bit of that rock and distorted kind of thing, I know this first tune had kind of this very contemporary sound of a solo. Even then, I think for me and for my ears, the vibrato is kind of the line that gets drawn. You can't bring that over, right? It's a really tough thing once you're used to playing like that, to play without it. But it will serve you well to have that control, right? To have the control to sometimes play with it, sometimes play without it.
Whenever I need it.
Exactly. If you have that control, that just makes you that much more marketable because it just widens the things that you can do. Right? Pick on guitar players here for a minute. Do you read?
Yeah.
You play any other instruments?
Well, I can play drum set.
You play drum kit.
And I get,
But you're reading notation on guitar, not just chord changes?
yeah.
Guitar players as a group are notoriously bad readers traditionally. We don't read music very well. Okay, so apparently we're running out of time. Man, that goes by quickly.
Yeah.
Again, I love having the questions. Again, it's a really powerful band, and please don't get me wrong. You got a ton of talent, a ton of chops, and I enjoyed listening to you immensely. But again, the effectiveness of the dynamic level of this band is going to increase exponentially if you can find that low end. If you can find that bottom of the dynamic level, then everything you do that's really punching out is going to be that much more effective. I promise you. I promise you. Be a huge addition to what this band can do. Awesome. Again, I'm in Waco, so please look me up if y'all have any questions. I'm happy to answer anything I can for you.